Despite those in the thrall of major publishers telling us that microtransactions are just optional and are only there as a matter of player choice, there's a building pile of evidence that suggests publishers would love microtransactions to be anything but optional. While Activision is building microtransactions and loot boxes into their games as social fucking experiences, it turns out that Electronic Arts, surprise fucking surprise, has been working on its own methods of digging around in your heads like money-fueled Charles Xavier's in order to manipulate you into spending more money on a game you've already spent money on. Courtesy of fellow YouTube pundit Yong Yi, we have information that EA has been working on adjusting player difficulty in order to give players a false sense of pride and accomplishment in an effort to boost their personal investment and therefore boost the likelihood of them spending money on microtransactions. If you go to the ACM Digital Library, you can find all sorts of articles and patents pertaining to video games and the monetization thereof. One juicy nugget of intel is a paper called Dynamic Difficulty Adjustment for Maximised Engagement in Digital Games, which was written in 2017. Oh, what a coincidence. The year of the loot box. And it's a paper written by a fuckload of people from Electronic Arts Incorporated. I'll read out the abstract for you. It contains all sorts of tech industry bollocks, but we'll get through it together. Dynamic Difficulty Adjustment, DDA, is a technique for adaptively changing a game to make it easier or harder. A common paradigm to achieve DDA is through heuristic prediction and intervention, adjusting game difficulty once undesirable player states, e.g. boredom or frustration, are observed. Without quantitative objectives, it is impossible to optimise the strength of intervention and achieve the best effectiveness. In this paper, we propose a DDA framework with a global optimisation objective of maximising a player's engagement throughout the entire game. Using level-based games as our example, we model a player's progression as a probabilistic graph. Dynamic difficulty reduces to optimizing transition probabilities to maximize a player's stay time in the progression graph. We have successfully developed a system that applies this technique in multiple games by Electronic Arts Incorporated and have observed up to 9% improvement in player engagement with a neutral impact on monetization. Now, despite the fact that it's written in that creepy cyborg tech industry language that dehumanises the audience members, the idea of dynamically adjusting difficulty is not inherently a bad idea, and it's not even a new one. If you look into the history of DDA, you'll see that there are various famous games that have used dynamic difficulty adjustments, like the first Crash Bandicoot, which would slow down obstacles and add extra continue points based on how many times a player died. Used well, DDA is a great tool. It allows weaker players to continue enjoying their games. It allows developers who have made these games to not have their work go to waste by frustrating a player into not continuing it. But we're talking about Electronic fucking Arts. So how has EA'd up the idea of dynamic difficulty adjustment? Well, Yongyi found a different paper, and that one is all about fucking up the idea of fair matchmaking in online games in order to, again, boost engagement. Now, alarm bells should be going off in your head if you followed the story about Activision patenting methods of using matchmaking in order to sell microtransactions to brand new players. If you don't remember, in that system, they would have you killed by more experienced players in an effort to trick you into thinking you needed to buy more stuff in order to have a competitive edge. Well, some boffins from EA have proposed an engagement-optimized matchmaking framework that maximizes overall player engagement. According to this paper, matching players of similar skill, creating fair matches, is not an optimal way of keeping players playing. It shouldn't surprise you that everything you do in a game is being monitored and analysed and utilised by Electronic Arts. This second paper reveals that such information EA is using is the install date of a game, your level of skill, how long you play, how well you do, all that kind of stuff. And this data is being used to predict how you will engage with a game. Will you play concurrent matches? Will you give up out of frustration? The word churn comes up a lot, and if you ever look at these papers or hear these fuckers speaking, you will hear that word quite a bit. It came up in our Gymquisition about scientific revenue, for example. Churn is the dreaded concept of a player putting down a video game, heaven forfend, and not picking it up again. At least for a lengthy period of time. And if you're not playing, you're not paying, because as Scientific Revenue puts it, we want to turn players into payers.
To have any chance of turning players into payers, game developers need to get their in-app purchases right.
In applicable terms here, Electronic Arts' dynamic matchmaking might notice that you've lost a fair few matches for a while, and there's a churn risk increase. So the answer, of course, would be to match you against less skilled players. Using all of that juicy data they've collected on you, they find out how good you are, put you up against people who are weaker at the game than you, and give you that rush of success. And if you suddenly experience a winning streak, chances are you'll stick around. Now, while the idea of dynamic difficulty adjustment works well enough in single-player experiences, in a multiplayer game, this is a case of EA really wanting to falsify a sense of pride and accomplishment, potentially making you think you're better at the game than you actually are. Meanwhile, the people you keep kicking the shit out of also think they're really good at the game, because when they've had the shit kicked out of them, they'll be matched up against players who are even shitter than they are. I wonder what it'll be like for the people who are the worst players in the world, because at some point there's going to be some player skill babushka doll situation going on. I guess they're the ones who'll be buying in-game advantages with microtransactions. The opposite's true as well. If you're on a really long winning streak, they might start throwing in matches that you can't win against players better than you, because winning all the time would get boring. The idea there would be to give you a loss to make you want to play again to right that wrong. It's fucking fiendish and ingenious when you think about it. Skin crawly, but genius. As Young says, and I think it's a wonderful quote that should be repeated, we're looking at a potential future where Electronic Arts decides when we win, lose or draw. This isn't Crash Bandicoot slowing some things down if you fuck up a lot. This isn't Onimusha asking if you'd like to lower the difficulty should a particular boss kick the crap out of you too much. This is a case of algorithms deciding just how well you can perform in an online PvP environment, and that is fucking creepy. Obviously, it can only be based in probability. They can match you up against whoever, but you still have a chance to win or lose and beat the odds. The problem is those odds are being stacked against or in favour of you, thanks to EA's data mining and algorithmic responses. But of course, this is only about player engagement. There's nothing wrong with audience retention and player engagement, unless of course you have a games as service model where engagement equals further expenditure. And that is of course the future EA wants. If you feel we're jumping to conclusions, the paper itself even sneaks it in and spells it out for us. When talking about its dynamic matchmaking EOMM framework, one part of the paper reads, "Moreover, we can even change the objective function to other core game metrics of interest such as playtime, retention, or spending." And I wonder which one of those functions interests Electronic Arts the most. I wonder. Oh, and all of this will be undetectable to the player, of course. At least according to the first paper on DDA. Wouldn't want to see the strings on this fuck puppet show, would we? What I love about all of this stuff, many of the things we've discussed when discussing industry bullshit, is how it sounds all paranoid and conspiracy theory-esque. Except for the fact that these companies are proudly crowing to investors and writing papers about all of this shit. They gladly admit to psychologically manipulating their audience. They gladly admit to getting inside people's heads and fucking with them. They are proud of how they exploit their own audience. And as Young again points out, player engagement is the key to player monetization in EA's eyes. So everything we've talked about here, and every time Electronic Arts brings up a method of keeping players engaged, they're talking about, as Blake Jurgensen says, a huge opportunity to monetize them over time. They're not even fucking subtle about this. If they want you all playing, they want you all paying. So once again, I pose the question, why the fuck should I be excited about Anthem? Or indeed, any game that these fucking snake oil sales bastards are trying to pass off as fun video games and not vectors for the disease that is microtransactions. Fuck 'em.